Russia has about 80% of its forces in forward positions ready to go at the border, and today could be the day. That's the word we are getting now. While Latvian officials report Russian forces continue to move into the occupied separatist areas of Ukraine, and at the UN General Assembly, the Ukrainian foreign minister is asking for more Western support, holding out hope that there is still a window of opportunity to deter Russia from an all-out war. Joining us now, our all-around top panel with the very latest, senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell. He's on the ground in Ukraine. ABC's Phil Lipoff on the ground in Poland. Also with us, White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks and ABC News' Elizabeth Schulze here with me on the set. Ian, let's start with you. The Ukrainian military seems to have reason to believe that Russia plans to go beyond eastern Ukraine, targeting at least two major cities now as the bell tolls there. What are the implications of that?
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting because the public discourse, if you like, has been that they don't expect an invasion to be imminent and to try and keep everybody calm and confident. And you've seen a gradual ramping up, really, I think, of the pressure on the Ukrainian government and their response in terms of making the public and the military ready for what could come. So we know from two sources who were in the room that there was a briefing last night from the Ukrainian military to President Zelensky and key lawmakers in which they said that they felt that Russia was in a position to perhaps go beyond the east of the country. It mentioned two specific cities that it could target, and they discussed the idea that they could also target the capital here, Kiev, as well. And of course, the consequences of that we saw almost immediately. The president addressing the nation for the second night in a row, essentially ordering this state of emergency. It's not quite a state of war footing, but it's close to that, and also activating part of the military reserve. 36,000 combat veterans, people with military experience, have now been called up. In fact, we were at the home of one young couple this evening. The father there, he has been called up. He found out early this morning. Tomorrow morning, he's heading out to the army. He doesn't know where in the country he's going to go, and it's time for for them to say their goodbyes tonight, knowing that they could be facing war this time tomorrow.
So they are definitely sensing a shift there on the ground, as you just mentioned. They're well aware of the state of emergency, in addition to all the additional assets.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there is this veneer of calm. It's kind of that image of a duck or a swan where it looks calm on the surface, but underneath there's kind of furious paddling going on. And I think that pretty much sums up what's going on here. There is no panic on the streets. You don't see empty supermarket shelves as we see in America and in Europe whenever there's a weather system coming through. People are being very calm and they're exuding confidence, but they're all making plans. This couple that we spoke to this evening have basically, in the last 24 hours, formed a plan A, B, and C. Plan A is where they shelter in place. Plan B is getting all the relatives together in a safe location. Plan C is to leave the city altogether. Every single Ukrainian family is now having to have that discussion here in Kiev or in those frontline cities. Nobody can really sit on their hands anymore waiting to see what happens. Everyone's going to have to hope for the best, but they're definitely preparing for the worst. Kira.
Yep, and they've been there before, that's for sure. Phil, today dozens of U.S. lawmakers sent President Biden a letter warning him that he'll need congressional authorization if any U.S. troops are to engage in Ukraine. Biden has made it clear that is not in his plans. You're there in Poland where thousands of U.S. troops are stationed already. Secretary Austin also announcing troops moving into the Balkans yesterday. What can you tell us about all the roles of these various troops and the various missions?
Well, first, that letter, Kira, as you know from being in D.C., virtually nothing is bipartisan these days in the United States. But that letter was very bipartisan, so bipartisan, in fact, that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Matt Gaetz both signed on. But of course, it's a reminder President Biden doesn't really need, because he said on a number of occasions, the troops that are over here in this region are not here to fight. So you mentioned the troops to the Balkans. Additional troops to the Balkans, 5,000 troops or so here in Poland. It's important because both places are NATO members, Poland, the Balkans, and both share borders with Russia, something that President Putin has said he doesn't like very much. And obviously, much of this, he says, is over the fact he didn't want Ukraine to join NATO either. So those troops are here in an assist, to assist NATO members. They are not here to fight. Here in Poland, they are getting ready with Polish authorities to mind the border. Because if President Putin pushes in further out of eastern Ukraine and attacks cities past eastern Ukraine, well, then a lot of Ukrainians will come this way toward the border. And Poland is preparing for a potential refugee crisis. Could be tens of thousands. Our Martha Raddatz reported today it could be over 1 million.
Meanwhile, you're monitoring more countries, more sanctions. Elizabeth, a number of other countries joining forces with President Biden now.
No doubt about it, Kira. This has been a coordinated effort from the U.S., from the EU, the U.K., other allies, including now Japan and Australia, announcing these sanctions, really targeting banks in Russia, financial assets of oligarchs there. This is so far an attempt to try to get to some of the people close to President Putin without directly kind of getting into the broader impact on the Russian household. You know, this is the 5th largest bank, for example, is targeted. But we did just hear from State Department spokesman Ned Price that they could go for the bigger banks, too. And that could have some real trickle-down effects, not just throughout the Russian economy, but to the rest of the global economy, too. We are watching very closely to see if this latest announcement from the U.S., from President Biden, that they're sanctioning the company behind Nord Stream 2, if that elicits any response from Putin, then we're going to get into this bit of a tit-for-tat, which means ultimately it could mean that Russia pulls back some of its oil exports. That could mean higher prices here at the pump. This is really something that the U.S. is emphasizing. It was the first of what could be many steps to come.
Okay, and Mary Alice, when could those additional steps come, and what could that look like?
Yeah, Kira, well, we heard Ned Price there reiterate the message we've heard from the other White House officials all day, that if Putin were to advance troops in any way beyond the Donbas region, that would trigger more of a response. I think that they're also looking for clues from the Ukrainians. We're going to see whether the Ukrainian military starts to respond. They would basically be admitting at that point that they view Russia as invading beyond territory that they deem remotely acceptable, that they're willing to bring the fight. And that would obviously put increased pressure on the White House to step up sanctions. You know, a few other interesting headlines from the State Department briefing here really fast. I was struck that Ned Price was asked about the U.S. keeping representatives and diplomats in Moscow at the embassy there. And he made the point of saying essentially yes. At this point, they still think it is better to have a means to send messages and communicate with the Russians than not. So no indications at this point that the U.S. would be pulling ambassadors out of Russia. And then last, he said that, of course, Ukraine would have the right to self-defense. You know, the last few days we've seen Putin really do everything to put Ukraine's president, Ukraine's military in a box to provoke them. And so far, the Ukrainians have been really applauded by the international community for their restraint. But you heard Ned Price there say that the Ukrainians have the right to self-defense. So obviously, the U.S. is going to back them up if and when the Ukrainian military decides to respond.
And Ian, while we have you there on the ground, these cyber attacks on Ukraine, what more can you tell us about those and the impact that they may be having?
Yeah, I mean, this clearly isn't the first time there's been a gradual ramping up of these kinds of attacks. I don't think this is what people are talking about when they're talking about a massive, crippling cyber attack on infrastructure. However, it's certainly targeted a number of key financial and government institutions and websites. They've been temporarily paralyzed, but you don't see any great impact out on the streets. But this campaign of intimidation, if you like, has been going on. I mean, the Ukrainian government immediately points the finger of blame at Russia. We can't say that categorically, but that clearly would be the prime suspect in carrying out these kinds of attacks. Also, there have been a number of bomb warnings over the last few weeks, really, in the country. They've ramped up again, just to try and unsettle people, to try and distill a sense of unease, a sense of fear, a sense of trepidation, and so it's part of this wider campaign of intimidation. But I don't think that's the big one. What people are expecting is that if there is a large-scale cyber attack, the lights will go out. People will lose data on their phone. There won't be any Wi-Fi. Communications will pretty much be frozen, at least for a short period of time, and it could well affect the delivery of electricity, water supplies, other key parts of the infrastructure that keeps a country running, and could well control the command and control capability of the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military. That's what people are thinking about in a whole large-scale kind of cyber attack. We haven't seen that, and that's certainly what people are alert to in the coming hours and days.
Got it. And Phil, that Ukrainian plea in front of the UN today that we observed, what are they looking for from NATO countries at this point?
Well, right off the bat, Kira, they asked the NATO countries to first not recognize the changes, obviously, made to the breakaway regions. That was the first thing they did. Then after that, they're asking for more sanctions. The European Union today, heavy sanctions. 351 members of the Russian Parliament that voted to ratify Putin's decision to go into eastern Ukraine, sanctioned. Russian banks, sanctioned. Oligarchs, sanctioned on the oligarchs. Sanctions on imports and partial exports to and from that region. That's what's happening. Then the U.S. joining Germany, putting a pause on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. That happened today as well. All of this is happening, but the question is all of this going to make a difference? Does Vladimir Putin take the sanctions, as he's been taking for years and years and years, and still go further into Ukraine? We're going to have to wait and see.
And Elizabeth, as we heard from Ned Price there at the State Department, if indeed Russia would rage a war here, the human rights aspect of things, that's really the first time we've heard this in such detail when that was raised in the briefing.
Yeah, this is something that U.S. officials are increasingly pointing to, that this would be a brutal, devastating, costly war, focusing on the refugees, focusing on how the Ukrainian people would be directly targeted as part of this assault, and really trying to say this is why you watching at home should care about this. This is a breach of international norms. These actions that President Putin has taken violate international law, decades of treaties that have really been in place since World War II. And by sort of allowing this behavior from Putin, which of course the White House and allies are saying we don't allow it, it sets a dangerous precedent. Not
breaking
only
the status quo.
Absolutely, it creates this new norm. It might have more authoritarian governments say we can go forward with action like that, and that is a dangerous road to go down. And it's something we're hearing in the language from spokespeople, but as well from the president now too.
Elizabeth, thank you. Ian, thank you so much. Everyone, Mary Ellis as well.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.